Hello and welcome to SophieCo. I'm Sophie Shevardnadze. Tensions between Iran and the U.S. spiral, with Washington pushing its European allies to abandon the nuclear deal and Tehran unwilling to compromise. Can they still pull out of the nosedive? Well, I asked Dr. Hushang Amirahmadi, three-time Iranian presidential hopeful and president of the American Iranian Council.
The Trump White House is tightening its noose around Iran, trying to isolate it in the Middle East and pushing for Europe to stop trading with the sanction-hit country. But with Iran's involvement in the region crucial to the balance of power, how far can the Americans go in putting pressure on Tehran before it backfires? Will Iran's new European friends dare to defy the will of Washington? And what will the leaders in Tehran do in the face of yet another round of their standoff with America?
Dr. Hushang Amirahmadi, president of the American Iranian Council, welcome to the show. Great to have you with us.
And thank you very much for having me.
So, speaking about the sanctions against Iran, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif recently said that Europeans will have to get wet if they want to swim against the tide of the U.S. unilateral anti-Iran moves. Will European countries, in your opinion, actually go on and risk anything for the sake of keeping trade ties with Iran alive?
Well, I never believed that without America, Europeans will be any effective, helpful to Iran. In fact, Europeans have been playing a very unfair game. They want to keep Iran in the JCPOA, and therefore they keep giving Iran empty promises that they cannot deliver. The purpose of European promises, empty promises, is just to keep Iran in the JCPOA. Iran so far has also been willing to listen to those empty promises because Iran also wanted to have a legitimate reason to stay in the JCPOA. Iran doesn't want to leave, is afraid of to leave, and therefore it is also looking for a pretext to stay. And I believe Europeans are also playing that game, giving Iran that pretext to stay in the JCPOA. Otherwise, there is no help or hope from Europe for Iran.
So European companies like French oil giant Total or Danish shipping heavyweight Maersk and many others have already withdrawn from Iran over fears of U.S. sanctions. Does this mean that trying to save the deal is really a losing battle for the Europeans?
It certainly is, and I don't believe Europeans believe that they can save the deal. But the problem is this: the one that wants to save the deal is Iran. That's the problem. Iran doesn't want to get out of the deal. Europeans are giving Iran the pretext Iran needs. The bottom line, the one that wants to stay in the deal is Iran, because Iran is afraid of exiting the deal and making America even more, aggravated and aggressive. So in fact, Iran also is trying to stay in the deal. Europeans are giving them. By the way, we all know that Europeans European governments do not control their private sector. So the promise that the European governments are giving are the promises that the governments are giving, not the private sector. And the private sector is not listening to their governments, and that's why they have left or leaving Iran in large numbers. And in the meantime, the Europeans have come up with this scheme called INSTEX, basically a trade mechanism that supposedly will help certain trade to continue, and particularly trade in so-called legitimate commodities, that is, commodities that are not under the U.S. sanctions. like medicine and food items.
Exactly. So
but the only...
Here's my next question,
ahead.
because it seems like Turkey is planning to set up a similar framework to the European one, but Turkey and Iran are not exactly the closest of countries. Their relations somewhat strained over Syria and other issues. So how far can this cooperation go? Is this just a shaky marriage of convenience for both countries?
Again, these schemes are really, at the bottom of it, are sort of oil for food or oil for medicine or other commodities for food and medicine, similar to what existed for Iraq back in 2003, that is before the U.S. invades Iraq. So only unfortunate that Iran will have to come after the JCPOA to such a situation. And I think no country, I believe no country wants to really jeopardize its relationship, economic relationship with the United States of America.
A group of U.S. senators actually recently published an op-ed in the Washington Post, and they're suggesting that the Trump administration has been trying to establish a strong link between Iran and al-Qaeda based on no hard evidence, and maybe using this speculation as a pretext to strike Iran, just like what happened with Iraq in 2003. Does Iran take these kinds of speculation seriously, or is it just internal American politics at play?
Yeah, that's a very good question. My own view of this is that Iran misread Trump, misunderstood Trump, and messed up its relationship with the U.S. and Trump significantly, to the point of bringing the relationship into some kind of a danger. You see, Trump is a businessman. Trump is not a politician. Trump is not a diplomat. From the day one, Trump wanted this nuclear deal renegotiated. Remember, Trump waited for almost a year before he leaves JCPOA. He did not leave JCPOA immediately he became president. He gave Iran a long time to think about, and he tried his best. And Trump did not reimpose sanctions for almost a year. Even after it reimposed sanctions, it actually gave 8 countries, a way out for exporting Iran's oil, and they continue to buy Iran's oil. So I think Trump cannot be responsible for everything that has happened between Iran and the U.S. I believe Iran has to take at least a big part of this responsibility, and I particularly fault Iran's foreign minister, Mr. Zarif, and Iran's President Rouhani, because both of them were so in love with the JCPOA, they could not see that particular deal renegotiated.
What you're saying is that Iran is interested to stay in the deal. But back in July, Iran's supreme leader, Khamenei, has ordered the country's atomic energy agency to prepare for an upgrade of Iran's uranium enrichment capacity. Is Iranian leadership bluffing, or is it serious about restarting the country's nuclear program?
No. Okay, first, even within the JCPOA, Iran has rights to do certain things. What Mr. Khamenei ordered, it was not outside the JCPOA. It is part of the JCPOA. So therefore, Iran, by doing that, Mr. Khamenei, by ordering that particular action, was not violating the JCPOA. Iran has not violated the JCPOA even at a millimeter, absolutely zero. And therefore, there has been no violation of the JCPOA from the Iran side. The International Energy Atomic Agency has verified that many, many times. And Iran continues to stay solid within the JCPOA. And therefore, whatever that has happened to JCPOA, as far as the JCPOA goes, is the U.S. side that is responsible. Iran doesn't dare to live and go outside the JCPOA. The JCPOA has become a trap, for Iran. Staying in the JCPOA gives it nothing. It's a one-way street. Leaving JCPOA creates even more dangers for Iran because it gives pretext to others to do even worse.
Okay, we're going to have to take a short break right now. When we're back, we'll continue talking with Dr. Hushang Amiramadi, president of the American Iranian Council, talking about the tensions between Tehran and Washington. Stay with us.
So what we've got to do is identify the threats that we have.
It's crazy.
Confrontation, let it be an arms race.
Who is on offense? Very dramatic development.
I personally am going to resist.
I don't see how that strategy will be successful.
Very critical time.
Time to sit down and talk.
Max Kaiser's Financial Survival Guide. Stacy, let's learn about bailouts. Let's say I'm the Troika and you're Greece.
I'm Greece. I'm bankrupted by Wall Street fraud. Thank you for helping. You're not a friend, Troika.
That's right. Bailouts equal debt slavery.
I've been saying the numbers mean something. They matter. The U.S. is over $20 trillion in debt. More than 10 white-collar crimes happen each day. 85% of global wealth belongs to the ultra-rich, 8.6%. And world markets rose 30%. Some with 400 to 500 trades per second. And Bitcoin rose to $20,000. China's building a $2.1 billion AI industrial park. But don't let the numbers overwhelm you. The only number you need to remember is one. One business show you can't afford to miss. The one and only Boom Bust.
In a world of fake partisan news, lies, and conspiracy,
it's time to wake up, to dig deeper, to hit the stories that mainstream media refuses to tell. More than ever, we need to be smarter. We need to stop slamming the door on the facts and shouting past each other. It's time for critical thinking. It's time to fight for the middle, for the truth. The time is now for watching closer, for watching the Hawks.
What politicians do is something we don't do. They put themselves on the line, and they get accepted or rejected. So when you want to be president, why would you want to be? Why would someone want to be president? What's it like to be president? What's it like when the phone rings at 3 in the morning? Can't be a good call. I'm interested always in the whys and the hows.
And Q Larry.
Question more.
with Dr. Hushang Amiramadi, president of the American Iranian Council and three-time Iranian presidential hopeful, talking about the risky turn the U.S.-Iranian tensions are taking. So, President Rouhani has recently said that U.S.-Iranian tensions are at a maximum. Hostile rhetoric has indeed been mounting from both sides since Trump pulled U.S. out of the nuclear deal. However, like with North Korea, it could be just Trump's way of establishing a negotiations process. And the U.S. president has said he wanted to meet Iran's leader. Would Mr. Rouhani agree to a tete-a-tete with him?
Well, this is not the problem is Mr. Rouhani is nobody. He just can't make that decision. I think it is the supreme leader who will make that decision. Unfortunately, Mr. Rouhani and Mr. Zarif, they messed up the nuclear deal, and they had given Mr. Khamenei all kinds of promises, and at the end of the day, they could not deliver any, and Mr. Khamenei therefore has become violently against the U.S. and against any new deal because he does not believe that either these people are able to deliver anything or the U.S. is willing to abide by any new rule. So therefore, it is Mr. Khamenei who is keeping the gate closed between U.S. and Iran.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has previously invited Iranians to look at U.S. diplomacy to North Korea as an example of Washington's negotiation powers. However, nothing really came out yet of the flashy diplomacy and American pressure. So, are negotiations between Washington and Pyongyang really a good example for Tehran to watch?
Not really. I think Iran has to find its own model. I mean, first, I think Mr. Trump was, when it comes to Iran, an opportunity that turned to become a threat. But I have to also say that Trump administration is the first administration in the last 40 years after Iran's revolution that has offered Iran a comprehensive negotiation toward normalization of relationship. They really offered comprehensive deal toward normalization of relationship, meaning the U.S. will get into the Iranian economy, help the economy and the rest of it. I think Iran missed a major opportunity, and it has to find its own model. North Korea is not the model that Iran should follow. Iran is a huge country, is a very important country, and the U.S. really needs Iran in that part of the world to create regional stability, regional peace. And North Korea is an isolated state. It's really nothing, it's nobody. So I think I would say Iran is way too important for Mr. Trump to consider it as North Korea or any other state in those terms. It has to see Iran as Iran, a country of 3,000 years of civilization, 82 million people, a geography huge, okay, not all of it.
Iran is largely seen as wielding more influence in Iraq than the Americans, especially post-ISIS. Iran is a Shia power, though, and Iraq has lots of restive Sunnis ready to rise again. Can increased Iranian influence in the country trigger a new onset of sectarian violence?
Yeah. Well, again, I don't believe the problem in the region between Iran and the rest of the community out there, the countries, is just Shia-Sunni. The Shia-Sunni divide is one issue, but it has been there for centuries, for 1,400 years. So that issue is not really a strategic matter, and they should not make it a key dividing line. The dividing line is this country's national interest. Whenever it comes to the national interest, for example, Iraqis are in the other side, Iran is on its own side, although Iraq is a Shia country, largely, but that's the only country in the Middle East that had an 8-year war with Iran. a lot of Shias on both sides killed each other. Over 500,000 Shias on both sides killed each other. So I don't think that it is just a Sunni Shia issue. It's the national interest of these countries. And I think all of them have to come together on that basis. The fact is that today's world is not the world that one country will maximize its interest against the interest of others. Every nation must benefit from any deal in the region. The biggest, I think, mistake that the JCPOA made was that it did not include like Israel, Saudi Arabia, or any of Iran's neighbor.
So with the nuclear deal in jeopardy, the positions of anti-deal Iranian conservatives and reinforced inside the country, could the hostility from the West push Iran into a more hardline political regime?
Well, Iran is going toward radicalism and hardline politics, no question about it. Remember, the Islamic Republic's problems are only 20% sanctions. 80% of Iran's problems is domestic, and it has to do with mismanagement of its economy. The country's economy is going down not just because of the sanctions that America imposed, it's because it is being mismanaged. The inflation is over 100%, unemployment over 40%, income is declining, particularly for the middle classes. So Iran is in very serious problem, and I think the country is moving in the direction of a critical situation toward the end of this summer. A lot can happen. So I think if I was Iran, I will make a huge domestic change. Iran really needs to change its domestic. It has to restructure that regime significantly and bring the people back to its side, bring the right people to manage that country, and should not put all its eggs on the side of the trying to help to get help from Europeans and others on sanctions or anything close to that. So the Islamic Republic cannot just blame Trump for all its ills. The problem is that the regime itself says that 80% of its problems are domestic and they are management issues. They have to address that. Okay, and the only way to do it is to restructure.
So Iran is also accused of being involved in Yemen, while the Saudis are going for a full-on intervention. Will Iran ever get involved directly on the side of the Houthis?
See, the problem is this. Yemen is an Arab country, and it is in the Arab world. Syria is an Arab country, is in the Arab world. Iraq is an Arab country, is in the Arab world. Iran is neither an Arab nor it belongs to an Arab world. So when Saudis intervene in Yemen or in Syria and elsewhere, it is legitimate, so-called. But when Iran does it, it's illegitimate because Iran has moved beyond its territory. It's unfortunate. This is double standard, of course, but it is also understandable because Saudis and the Arab world is saying, what the hell with Iran to intervene in the Arab world, quote unquote. Although we don't really have an Arab world, there are so much problems within the Arabs themselves. But nonetheless, Iran, I believe, should stay away from the Arab world. It should go back to its own borders, okay, and create a whole new relationship.
The Senate just passed a resolution that calls for ending U.S. support to the Saudi campaign in Yemen, and it is expected to make it through the House and be vetoed by Trump. Is this a sign of what's to come if Democrats win in 2020? Can Saudis afford to continue their rivalry with Iran if they fall out of Washington's favor?
Well, first, the Yemen and the Saudis' intervention in Yemen started under President Obama. It did not start with Mr. Trump. That's a mistake. In fact, no president of the United States sold as much weapon to the Middle East than Mr. Obama. Mr. Obama has record of selling military machinery to Middle Eastern countries, including Saudi Arabia. Okay, but it was very quiet and nice. The question, after all, there is not much of a big difference when it comes to Republicans or Democrats when it comes to foreign policy. They really come together. They have certain, policy differences, but at the end of the day, they really come together. In fact, I believe, and it is true, Mr. Trump is not a regime changer. It is not an interventionist. It has always said that I don't want to get into it. It wanted to get out of Syria. I could promise you that Hillary would have 100% intervened in Syria militarily. It will never have given up on Assad. But Trump gave up. I think there is a lot of misunderstanding of what Trump is doing or who Trump is and what these American Democrats are. It's only unfortunate that a lot of misinformation is going around. The only reason that's the case is because Mr. Trump has a big mouth.
All right. Thank you so much for this interview. We were talking to Dr. Houshang Amiramadi, three-time Iranian presidential hopeful and president of the American Iranian Council, discussing the tense relations between the two nations in the context of wider Middle East. That's it for this edition of Sophie & Co. I'll see you next time.
Thank you very much for having me.